Greetings, my fellow subjects. It is I, Rockotar, and let me just cut to the chase, because you've probably already seen the title and thumbnail. Out of all the Disney movies released in the past 85 years, Pinocchio is easily my favorite. And it's not just that it's my favorite, but I also believe it to be objectively the best as well. Although, proving that art is objectively good is impossible, so technically it's still my opinion. But I'm sure as heck going to try and prove it anyways. First, let me start off by saying Pinocchio is not a movie about a puppet who tells lies which makes his nose grow longer and also just happens to want to be a real boy. Now what was that about, is probably what you're thinking. You see, that was me ranting about people who strip away all the depth of the movie and the story and just sum it up as puppet lies, nose grows, wants to be real boy. Pinocchio wanting to be a real boy is important, yes. But it's not his only goal for the whole story. What about what he actually has to do to become a real boy, eh? And as for the lying and nose-growing stuff, don't even get me started. Actually, you know what? It's too late! Let the rant continue! The nose-growing / lying scene is only like 2 to 3 minutes of the whole movie. Not the whole thing! It's iconic, sure, but it's not even the main part of the story. It's barely even a subplot. How come only one, 2 to 3 minute scene in this movie is all anyone ever talks about? What about the rest of the movie? Most people don't even represent the scene correctly when referencing it. Pinocchio wasn't trying to be sly or tricky or clever. He was lying because he was afraid of the consequences of the truth. You know, something that actually ties into the rest of the themes of this movie. Oh wait, apparently nobody's actually seen the movie, so let's just all make Pinocchio look like a stupid idiot every time he appears in anything. Sorry about that. I get so frustrated when every time Pinocchio is ever referenced in anything, it's a reference to the nose-growing and lying scene and nothing else! Okay. For real, I'm done this time. Now on to the actual review. Pinocchio is a very rich and thematic movie. You know, unlike most modern Disney movies. Or, really, modern movies in general. At its core, Pinocchio is a movie about temptation and its consequences. Surprisingly, temptation is a theme that isn't often explored, despite it having some of the greatest storytelling potential of any theme. This movie actually goes quite in depth and even gets quite dark with a lot of its themes, but the dark parts of the story help to bring out the most in our characters, or in some cases, the worst. Temptation isn't the only theme in this movie, it's also about perseverance and redemption. This movie manages to perfectly portray these three themes and seamlessly weave them together. Let me get some basic stuff that won't require any sort of deep analysis of out of the way first. Such as how the film opens with quite possibly the most iconic song in any Disney movie ever made. And it's iconic for a reason. I mean, they use it on every single opening of every single one of their movies that they've ever made, pretty much, with some rare exceptions. And of course, I'm referring to When You Wish Upon a Star. And, I'd show you that song, but, well, you know how these things go. Anyway, the song is a masterpiece. It perfectly captures that feeling of hopes and dreams with such a magical fairy tale aura to it. It's perfect through and through. And that's not the only great music, too. There's 3 other iconic songs that play in this movie, but we haven't got all day to analyze every single one of them. And as for the background music, that's also really good, too. Well, that's enough about the music. If you want proof of how good the soundtrack is, you don't need me to tell you. Just go listen to it on Spotify for yourself. Another quick but important topic I'd like to mention is the animation, which you've probably noticed from the background footage that I've been playing, when it's not blurred, that is, for copyright reasons, that I have to say, this movie is beautiful. This is probably one of the best looking Disney animated... No, scratch that! One of the best looking animated movies, period. And it came out in 1940. 1940, people! That was over 80 years ago! And it still looks better than most modern animated movies. Take notes, Disney. And it's not that traditional animation is superior to CGI animation, except that it totally is, but that this animation has so much care and effort put into it that it truly feels like a painting come to life. Anyways, I'm getting a bit carried away. The pacing of the movie is also pretty much perfect, unlike this video. It starts out slow, but gradually adds more elements over time that expand upon what has already happened. Well, that's pretty much it for all the basic stuff. Now, on to the deep, life-changing, I'll never be the same again stuff. Well, actually, next, I'd like to talk about the intro to the movie, which isn't really all that deep, but it is very important for everything later on. The feeling and mood of the introduction is very different from what's to come. It's very warm, friendly, homely, and above all, comfortable. This is of course all very intentional. The intro spends a lot of time making you feel good, and at home with Geppetto. That way, we feel more lost and alone when we follow Pinocchio's slow descent into a world of terror. This feeling of warmth and happiness will not be seen again until the end of the movie. The lesson here being, enjoy the good times while they last, because things won't always be this good. And I suggest to you that you absorb the atmosphere of this intro before we march into evil, before the dark times, before the fox. Now I'd like to shed some light on a few of the characters. Let us start out with the protagonist of the film, Jiminy Cricket. What? You thought I was going to say Pinocchio? You see, Jiminy Cricket is actually the first character to appear on screen. Therefore, he must be the protagonist. Well, in all honesty, he kind of is. He has just as much, if not more, screen time than Pinocchio, and as I said before, he appears first. Jiminy Cricket is simply iconic. I mean, it's just a fact. All his scenes are iconic. There's no other word that fits as well.
Very good. Very, very good. Well, you can't please everybody.
Jiminy is also pretty funny and relatable as well. This whole movie, honestly, has really great humor, and it's aged like fine wine. You know, unlike how most Marvel movies will be in 15 years' time. Not that I hate Marvel movies or anything like that. Most of them. But back to Jiminy Cricket. He's much more than just comic relief. He also has a really great character arc and development throughout the film. He starts out as just a humble cricket with little to his name, having to sneak into Geppetto's home because he has no place of his own. But his goodwill and heart lead him to volunteer to be Pinocchio's conscience. He believes this will be an easy job, which he is sorely wrong about. That leads me to one of my many deep dives to come. Jiminy's dismissal of how hard it will be to play the role of a conscience is indicative of how people believe they will make the right choices in life because they think they know the difference between right and wrong. However, we consistently choose the wrong choices anyway. Why? Because temptation and excuses, of course. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I just wanted to point out how clever this movie can be in its writing. Prepare yourselves for many more deep dives to come. You've seen the runtime. You signed up for this. Now strap in. So, Jiminy Cricket becomes Pinocchio's conscience and sings a whole song about what to do when temptation comes.
Give a little whistle, and always let your conscience be your guide.
It's pretty good. Unfortunately, a bit later in the plot, Jiminy Cricket is late on the job when temptation arrives. Which is clever because we often don't think about what we're doing until after we've made a quick decision. Get it?
But unfortunately, Jiminy Cricket can't stop Pinocchio from making the wrong choice, which leads to a, for some reason, rarely spoken about part of his character arc. That being that he almost gives up and leaves Pinocchio to his supposed success. I like how it shows both that Jiminy Cricket is not perfect and will also make the wrong judgment sometimes, but also how he gets somewhat jealous. When Jiminy Cricket tries his best to do good, he gets kicked around, ignored, and left in the dust, while Pinocchio, who does the wrong thing, is rewarded for his bad decisions. We're all so quick to be jealous and question whether we made the right choice at the time, because we work so hard to do the right things, and yet others who go around being careless idiots seem to get rewarded, or worse, praised, which they don't deserve. Of course, Jiminy Cricket does pull through in the end. Part of what makes Jiminy Cricket so great is how much he's willing to endure, how hard he tries to show Pinocchio the way, yet struggles to convince him. Even when Pinocchio gives in to evil and turns away from good, Jiminy Cricket is still there, never giving up, always ready to tug him back to the light. Even when the situation is at its worst, Jiminy Cricket goes on anyways. Not because he has to, but because it's the right thing to do. I like that when Pinocchio makes it inside Monstro near the end, Jiminy Cricket gets left outside. We'll get to that Monstro eventually, one step at a time. Don't worry. For a long time, I never really thought much about what this might symbolize, but it suddenly hit me while writing this script. You see, Jiminy Cricket getting stuck outside of Monstro actually represents abandoning your conscience because it will just hold you back and you can do anything on your own without it! I'm joking, of course. No. In reality, it represents Pinocchio having realized what is right and wrong, and that he doesn't need Jiminy Cricket to tell him what is right and wrong, because he now knows to do the right thing on his own. Just a neat, small detail I noticed that proves even further just how much depth this movie actually has. And, of course, Jiminy Cricket's story also has a heartwarming close, but I'll talk more about that when we reach the ending of the movie. Pinocchio time. Now for Mr. Lying Newsman! Am I right? No. In reality, there is far more to his character than that one scene. Right off the bat, from Pinocchio's first scene, we see both how much good he can bring and how much harm he is also capable of inflicting. He brings joy, fun, and laughter to Geppetto with his kind heart. He's so much fun and joy that he almost sets the whole world on fire. Literally.
Where's your bucket? Hey, water! Water!
A child can be a great joy and a great pain. For a character, scenes like this are very important, because it establishes how Pinocchio can make mistakes due to his curious nature and lack of experience with real-world problems. But of course, because Pinocchio is the protagonist of this story, he will, like any good protagonist, rebuke evil and choose good instead. Except, of course, that he does the very opposite of what I just said. Unlike pretty much every modern-day film character, Pinocchio is not only heavily flawed, but those flaws actually impact the plot. In fact, his mistakes are the very thing which drives forward the plot most of the time. But that doesn't necessarily make him an unlikable character either, as the mistakes he makes are usually made in ignorance and are the very same types of mistakes people often make in real life. For example, when Pinocchio is tricked into going to the theater. For a grown adult, the tricks used by Honest John are clearly too good to be true, and most people wouldn't fall for them. However, it is believable that someone like Pinocchio would fall for such tricks. He is very naive and innocent.
he doesn't yet realize that the world is trying to take advantage of him. This is one of the very few times where a character falling for the villain's trick in a plot actually works. Pinocchio is innocent and inexperienced, so therefore he is more likely to fall into a trick like this than other more mature and experienced characters. But the blame can't entirely be placed on the villains, as Jiminy Cricket does warn Pinocchio about them.
All right, then. Here's what we'll tell him. You can't go to the theater. Say thank you just the same. You're sorry, but you've got to go to school.
And also sang a whole song about temptation as well. To which Pinocchio responds by ignoring his advice and going anyway, showing that he cares more about the life of an actor than doing the right thing. And so, when things go wrong, we do feel bad for Pinocchio, but not too bad. It's hard to explain, but it really is just right. When given the choice between the boring hard route, going to school, or the fun and easy route, becoming an actor, it is of course a no-brainer for Pinocchio. However, he does of course end up pulling the short stick because of his actions. Something you rarely see in movies these days for some reason. And then of course comes the iconic scene! Jiminy Cricket trying to rescue Pinocchio from the cage! What do you think I was gonna say? The lying and nose-growing scene? Please! Haven't we talked about that one enough already? Anyway, when Jiminy Cricket shows up, you'd expect him to be able to free Pinocchio, but no, he actually isn't able to help. I really like this scene because it shows that actions have consequences and you can't just undo your mistakes after you make them. And you can't always rely on someone else to bail you out. And then he gets bailed out like 2 minutes later. Well, technically this is where the lying scene would be. And don't get me wrong, it's a terrific scene, just like any other in this movie. But it already gets way more attention than the rest of the movie, which is quite unfair to the brilliance that is the rest of the movie. Is there anything I can say that would add to what I mentioned before, though? Well, I guess I really like the line from the Blue Fairy about how a lie will grow out of control until it becomes as plain as the nose on your face.
A lie keeps growing and growing until it's as plain as the nose on your face.
She's right, Pinocchio. You better come clean.
But back to being rescued. I'm perfectly fine with Pinocchio being bailed out here, as it was his first true mistake he made, since the fire incident was more of an accident. With this rescue, he is gracefully given a second chance. A second chance to prove he isn't a lost cause. A second chance to do the right thing. A second chance to chuck out the window! Wait, what? In most cases, when a hero is given a second chance in a story, they stand in the place where they took the wrong turn, face their error, and make the right decision, proving they have grown as a person. But Pinocchio takes that second chance and yeets it all the way to Tomorrowland! And you see, I really like that. Why do I like that, you ask? A, because it's different. I mean, the answer speaks for itself. I don't want to watch the same character journey every single time, you know. B, because it puts the main character in their lowest possible position. And C, it's simply just more realistic, honestly. Pinocchio's waste of a second chance is particularly impactful because of how he betrays Jiminy Cricket here. The first time, he didn't know better, and while he should have listened, it is somewhat forgivable. But this time, he basically just ignores Jiminy Cricket because his desires are more important than doing the right thing. This now makes us question Pinocchio's character. Will he ever do the right thing? He failed twice. And let's just pretend for a moment we don't know how the rest of the movie is going to play out. This scenario brings us to a point of uncertainty which you rarely find in most movies in general. Around this point in the film, Pinocchio reaches his lowest low, where he has everything he ever seemingly wanted, but clearly isn't happy. A great example of why the classic phrase, show don't tell, really does matter. The whole Pleasure Island sequence is a great example of that rule. Whenever Pleasure Island is mentioned or talked about by characters, it's always as this great place of fun where you can do whatever you want. And while all the children see it as that, the villains react to it with maniacal or fearful expressions, giving an air of dread to the whole place, where you know something is not right. The way the boys interact with everything on the island is clearly wrong, and yet they believe it all just to be fun and games. Destruction, drinking, smoking, violence, all these things we know aren't right for them to do, which contradict the very idea of the island being a great place. Suddenly, the name Pleasure has a devious and sinister sound to it. By the time Jiminy Cricket finds Pinocchio, the atmosphere has changed even more. Now the island reveals itself for what it truly is, a pit of evil and corruption, which takes away everything good and leaves nothing. We see Pinocchio and his new friend, Lampwick, playing pool, which honestly isn't necessarily bad on its own. However, the atmosphere is very lonely and negative. Sometimes, even good things can be corrupted to evil.
Oh yeah, I almost forgot to mention Lampwick.
He isn't in the movie for very long, yet his role is no less important than the other side characters. He represents both bad influences and people who have been led far away from the good path. You must be wary of who you befriend. Lampwick was once like you and me, probably, but over time, he has given into temptation and evil, until he simply doesn't care anymore about what he does, or who he has to physically or emotionally hurt to get what he wants. Pinocchio sees Lampwick as the more fun and interesting friend to follow over the boring, rule-following Jiminy Cricket. He is once more blinded by what he wants and ignores what he needs, that being to do the right thing and to run away from evil. We can see here how bad friends can really mess up your life, as Pinocchio was already being led astray before, but when he meets Lampwick, he falls even lower. Lampwick claims the spot of superiority, a spot which makes him the ideal guy to follow. Of course, following him is a terrible idea, and Pinocchio only ends up more unhappy and depressed than he was when Stromboli captured him. Lampwick clearly doesn't care about Pinocchio, and is only dragging him around so that he can brag and put himself on a pedestal. Jiminy shows up and tries to show Pinocchio that nothing he is doing is good. It won't make him happy. But Pinocchio doesn't want to admit his mistakes, so he goes along with his new friend, Lampwick, instead, and continues to ignore his conscience. However, Pinocchio does change his mind after witnessing an event that will probably haunt him for life.
Don't worry, we'll get to that in a bit.
After seeing this and realizing Jiminy is right, Pinocchio finally comes to his senses about the error of his ways, and escapes before his fate is sealed.
Except he doesn't. Well, he does realize the error of his ways.
But, unfortunately, part of the donkey curse from Pleasure Island, or whatever it is, starts to get to him as a punishment for his misdeeds.
He does manage to get away before things get too bad, though.
Pinocchio pays for his mistakes here with actual consequences. Well, until the end of the movie, anyways.
If only modern movie characters were allowed to have consequences. But this isn't the time for that rant. There's only enough room for one rant in one video, and I've already used up that time.
Pinocchio made the wrong choice before, but he was forgiven and got a second chance. But choosing evil a second time doesn't give you a third chance. All throughout our lives, we say we want to do good, and yet so often we end up making the wrong choices again. Eventually, we'll go too far and bring ourselves to our lowest point. But perhaps it takes reaching our lowest point in order for us to reach our highest point.
Which is exactly what Pinocchio does next. For real. After a quick scene where they discover Geppetto was swallowed by a whale, of course.
So, Pinocchio and Jiminy Cricket go out to save him, and they must travel through the ocean to reach him. And along the way there are some legendary Jiminy Cricket scenes as usual. Eventually they make their way to Monstro the whale, and I like how all the other fish are so terrified of Monstro that his seabed is completely devoid of all other life.
Honestly, once you see the end of this movie, you'll probably be scared of Monstro too.
A small detail most people miss regarding the climax of Pinocchio's arc is that he learns from his mistakes and uses his newfound knowledge to his advantage to solve problems instead of falling into them. How so? Remember Pinocchio's first mistake in the movie?
Ooh, nice.
Now, how does he escape Monstro with Geppetto?
We're getting out.
Getting out? But how?
We'll make them sneeze.
Ah, see what I mean? This movie is a masterpiece. Another factor which makes the story more impactful and emotional is that of Geppetto. I've already mentioned him a few times before, but let's take this moment to focus on him a bit. Geppetto is pretty much the most pure good character in this story, outside of the Blue Fairy. He represents doing good and what Pinocchio should strive for, which, of course, only makes his choices to follow temptation and wrongdoing more heartbreaking. Especially when considering that Geppetto only knows Pinocchio as the innocent young wooden boy who was brought to life before his very eyes. He doesn't know about how he took the wrong path and made mistakes. And when Pinocchio yet again chooses the wrong choice, Geppetto still doesn't know. However, because Geppetto can only ever see the good in Pinocchio, and refuses to leave him behind, he goes out, akin to the Good Shepherd, to find his lost son and save him from the darkness. And if he ever finds Pinocchio, Pinocchio will have to reveal that he made the wrong choices, and that he betrayed the trust of Geppetto. Or he could just lie, because that's the only thing Pinocchio ever does, am I right, guys? Sorry. Sorry about that. I just had to get that last bit of rage out of my system. I'm good now. As I was saying, Geppetto is a great side character. It's hard not to love him and his happy, loving family nature. As I said before, temptation is the main theme of this movie. Oh look! There he is now!
A live puppet without strings.
A thing like that ought to be worth a fortune to someone. Remember what I said about temptation?
Uh-huh.
Well, that's him.
Oh, no, Jiminy. That's Mr. Honest John.
Honest John?
Honestly speaking, Honest John is amazing. I could probably spend 7 minutes breaking down how great the 3 or 4 scenes he's in are. Why 7 minutes exactly? Because I feel like it. But don't worry, I won't actually take that long, probably. I love that when Honest John and Gideon first appear, they're in the middle of a conversation about how clever and devious they are for tricking people. Well, I say a conversation, but it's pretty much just Honest John bragging to Gideon. I really like how casually these two walk around the streets with no one batting an eye at their presence. A perfect portrayal of how evil is always lurking around us, even when we feel like everything is normal and natural. Or, you could go even further and say, this is a representation of how we allow many crooks to get away with misdeeds every day, while we just look the other way because it doesn't immediately affect us. But I doubt they intended quite that much from a single scene of 2 characters walking down the street. But hey, it's fun to think about. So, anyway, Honest John and Gideon notice Pinocchio and plan to sell him off to the performer Stromboli for some quick and easy cash. There's also some good comedy here, but I did promise I wouldn't spend 7 minutes analyzing the characters, so you'll just have to trust me and watch the movie for yourselves to see what I mean. Then, of course, there's the iconic song. Okay, that's enough of that. We don't want the Disney overlords to get angry, do we? Pinocchio, being the curious and fun-seeking young wooden boy he is, decides that Honest John's plan sounds better than going to school. And, of course, he gets roped into an adventure that he could never have imagined. But we've kind of already talked about that, so let's move on. There's also a brief scene in which Honest John and Gideon meet up with the true master villain of the film, one of the only villains in animation history who actually gets away with their plan.
As usual, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself.
Let's backtrack a step. I really like the dark and misty atmosphere of this meeting scene, making sure we don't get too used to the happy atmosphere of the Blue Fairy rescuing Pinocchio, which was the scene that had just happened before this. Just when you think you've gotten away from evil and temptation, it's ready and waiting for you to pull you back in and take away everything you ever loved. The way the Coachman is portrayed in this scene is honestly terrifying, and I'm not just referring to that shot of his face. Honest John makes himself out to be such a big criminal, only for the Coachman to reveal that his plans, which he pays handsomely to achieve, are far, far more ambitious and evil. As Honest John and Gideon find out the true scope of his plan, even they fear the Coachman. I like how they acknowledge that the Coachman's plans go against the law as well, and aren't just sleazy trickery to make a quick bag of gold.
And I takes him to Pleasure Island. Ah, Pleasure Island. Pleasure Island? But the law, suppose they...
The fact that we don't hear exactly what the Coachman is planning makes his plan all the more terrifying, since we don't know what this evil is that could cause even the other villains to cower at the thought of it. The suspense is intense as we follow Pinocchio knowing, or should I say not knowing, what evils are attempting to trick and manipulate him. The moment we see the Coachman driving that carriage with Pinocchio and the other boys, it's honestly very chilling. Think about how many people the Coachman has tricked, and yet he just smiles as he does it.
Such evil is so rarely seen in animation, especially not when it's a character who could honestly, realistically exist in our world.
Oh, and if you look closely, you can see the terrible fate which awaits these boys, driving them to their final destination. A grim fate awaits those who choose instant gratification and fun over doing good and having patience and consideration. The true evils of the Coachman in Pleasure Island are surely no better showcased than by the genuinely horrifying personnel who work for the Coachman. Just dark, shadowy voids. Everything good has been drained from them. They've come to a point where they are willing to kidnap and enslave children. Such people can scarcely be called human anymore.
And now we've reached what I consider to be quite possibly the darkest scene in any Disney movie ever made, and that includes most of their live-action films.
Jiminy Cricket discovers the truth of Pleasure Island, that it brings out the worst in everyone who indulges in it. Quite literally. Every boy who is brought to the island is turned into a donkey and sold off to be slave animals who work in mines.
Seriously. Name a Disney movie that has a scene as dark as this. Even the Black Cauldron has nothing on this scene.
The sheer horror and sadness in the half-transformed boy's voice sends shivers down my spine just thinking about it. We will never see anything like this in a Disney animated movie ever again. I 1000% guarantee it.
But of course, I must be twisted or something because I think that's a shame. And possibly explains how Honest John and Gideon can exist. But then there's also Jiminy Cricket who can talk. And, that's a whole rabbit hole which we don't have time for in this video.
Also, Lampwick, Pinocchio's fake friend from before, is caught up in this terrifying trap as his selfishness comes back to bite him in a horrifying transformation scene. Which is another scene so dark you'd be shocked to find it's from a Disney movie. The close-up shots of his hands morphing into those of a donkey right before Pinocchio's face. The kicking and screaming as he yells for help, but there's no one there to save him. And to top it all off, Pinocchio's horrified expressions as it's all happening. And before you even get a moment to take it in, Pinocchio starts to be affected as well. I'm fairly certain that it is quite impossible to watch this scene without getting chills. Okay, back to the coachman. I'm not quite done with him yet, actually. Now, I would like to state an idea which I and a few others have noticed about the coachman, and you have already seen some evidence in favor of it. That being, the coachman is basically Satan. I mean, remember the face he made at the bar? But also, and more importantly, the way he tempts people with promises of good. He gives you everything you think you want, only for it to lead to eternal suffering, or in this case, suffering for the rest of your life as a slave donkey. His minions might as well be demons. All we ever see of them is a terrifying black shadow with red eyes, who do their master's evil bidding. The coachman is also essentially the opposite of Geppetto in many ways. As I said a while ago in this video, Geppetto is basically the goodest of good guys, a follower of the light. Pinocchio is given the choice to follow either his father Geppetto or the coachman and his lackeys, a choice of light versus dark. Yet he chooses evil instead of good for most of the runtime. And what does he get for his choice? Well, nothing good, that's for certain. The lesson is simple, yet very powerful and well executed. Temptation is all around us at all times. Never let your guard down. Stay on the straight and narrow path, as Jiminy Cricket says, and never deviate, no matter how enticing the other paths may look. At last we've reached the finale of the film. One of the most epic, engaging, emotional, atmospheric, and intense finales in any film ever made. Pinocchio and Geppetto's desperate attempts to escape from the sheer size and power of Monstro. It's terrifying, but also amazing. It's a symbolic showcase that the right thing to do is almost always the hardest thing to do, unlike the evil path, which is so easy in comparison. The moment when we see the way out to finally escape Monstro, and they just barely make it. Despite Geppetto being heroically saved, Pinocchio lies lifeless on the beach. Yes, my friends, he straight up dies. Name one modern Disney movie where that happens. Here's a hint. You can't. He dies, finally choosing to do the right thing. He could have swam away to safety and saved himself, but he chose to risk his own life to save his father, and ultimately paid for his father's life with his own. Even when you do the right thing, that doesn't mean everything will be sunshine and rainbows. Doing the right thing is almost always the hardest thing to do, and you have to be willing to sacrifice anything and everything. Of course, in the end, Pinocchio is brought back. This time, as a real boy, finally achieving his goal, but only after he is willing to give up everything in an act of pure selflessness, even his own life. I'm not usually a fan of bringing characters back to life, but Pinocchio rightfully earned his resurrection. And of course, we can't forget that Pinocchio isn't the only one who earns a happy ending. Jiminy Cricket is also rewarded with a gold badge for his job well done as a conscience. Though he thought it would be easy at first, he found out the long and hard way that not only trying to show someone how to do the right thing, but also trying to be an example of that right thing is much harder than it sounds at first. But in the end, it'll be worth it, because you'll have made yourself and everyone around you into better people. The scene where the gold badge is bestowed upon Jiminy always brings a smile to my face. There's only one part of the whole movie I would even so much as consider changing anything about, and that'd be maybe adding a bit more to when Geppetto and Pinocchio reunite. If Pinocchio was forced to confess everything he had to do, and Geppetto forgave him anyways, I think that would be
even just slightly more better. But
In the movie, they just kind of skip past that, and Geppetto was just like, whatever happened, it doesn't matter. Probably more of a runtime thing than the script.
however, if my hypothetical scene did exist, it would add another layer of depth to this already complex story, while still fitting in perfectly. Kind of like the ending of the parable of the prodigal son. But then again, as I already said, I would scarcely change anything about this movie. It's already practically perfect. But, this one scene might have made it just that little bit more perfect-er. Pinocchio is a movie that is not afraid to fully commit to its themes and ideas. Nothing is held back. Though it's still safe for children, of course. It's modern Disney movies that are the actual problem, playing it too safe. Well, to be fair, they did cut out a few particularly dark and terrifying moments from the book. But if they were to have adapted everything, the movie would have probably been rated R or something like that. Following the book to a T would have probably just made this movie worse, since this is a rare example of a movie that improves upon its source material. It takes all the best parts and expands upon them while leaving out the weaker parts. Take Jiminy Cricket, for example. He's only in like one chapter of the original book, and he wasn't even called Jiminy Cricket. He was just the talking cricket. But Disney took him, gave him a name, and made him into an icon. I can't imagine the movie without him. Also, Pinocchio. He's kind of a jerk in the book. I mean, he literally kills Jiminy Cricket in the very first chapter that he appeared in. And a lot of the life lessons are kind of lost when all you really want to see is Pinocchio suffer instead of relating with him and sympathizing with him through his failures. Of course, there's still several dark scenes from the book that did make the cut, as I've clearly shown in this video. And I think it's important to have at least some dark scenes, because the dark moments make all the emotional moments that much more powerful. Unfortunately, most modern Disney movies seem to be outright allergic to anything even remotely dark or consequential. Now, I know what you're thinking. Yes, Disney movies are technically designed for children. Sort of. But that's another discussion for another time. Anyways, my point being that the end result is that most of the movies just end up feeling like watered-down experiences, especially when compared to the likes of Pinocchio, which pulls every stop to tell its story in the most impactful way possible. And that means having frightful scenes and darker themes which are fully explored and not just relegated to some backstory or a subplot or something that just happens near the end of the movie for like 5 seconds for a cheap emotional moment. Well, to be fair, one modern Disney movie, that being Zootopia, at least did try to tackle a few darker themes, but unfortunately the final result was just kind of okay. It never quite reaches the same level. Anyways, this is not a video about Zootopia. Maybe one day, I don't know. And also, unfortunately, Disney is not only allergic to serious storytelling, but also this little thing we like to call creativity. But that's also another discussion for another day. Anyways, what were we talking about again? Oh yes, emotional moments in Pinocchio.
When Pinocchio finally does the right thing and sacrifices everything to save his father, we feel it. And when he's resurrected for his good deed, it doesn't feel like we were tricked into a fake-out death, but instead, we are happy because Pinocchio earned his humanity, and Geppetto's wish has finally come true.
Take notes, modern Disney. Well, as you can see, I've made quite a lot of points. And there's probably more I didn't mention, but I can't go on forever. But Pinocchio might forever be the best Disney movie ever made. And I hope that I've shown at least a few of you out there that there's far more to Pinocchio than is usually made out. And it is assuredly a timeless masterpiece. that Disney is about to take a dump on with their live-action animation bald blue fairy Tom Hanks remake. Thank you to all my fellow citizens out there for watching this highly insightful and intellectual video. But before you go, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and click the bell next to it, and also leave a comment and a like while you're at it. And share this video with anyone else you might happen to know. And most importantly, stay iconic.